My parents despised me as a child. I wore old, torn clothes while all their money went to their beloved children, and I got by on my McDonald salary. One day they called me, and, growing up, I always felt like the odd one out in my own family. It was this quiet, constant weight on my shoulders, like I'd been cast in a story where my role was written for me without my say. My older sister Jessica and my brother Alex were practically worshipped by our parents, and there was no hiding it. I was the third wheel in a family of golden children. Jessica was the perfect daughter, the one who checked every box on the ideal child list. She was beautiful, smart, and so magnetic that people couldn't help but be drawn to her. She had this knack for making everyone feel like they were lucky just to be in her presence, and my parents fell for it hard. Jessica breezed through school, always bringing home awards and accolades, and every little achievement of hers was celebrated like she'd won a Nobel Prize. Family dinners turned into Jessica's personal highlight reel, and I'd find myself zoning out, staring at my plate, counting the peas or mashing potatoes just to keep from feeling invisible. Then there was Alex, the prodigy, the future of the family, as my parents liked to call him. They set up a college fund for him before he was even out of diapers so he could attend the best schools, join exclusive clubs, and experience everything top-notch. I'd hear my parents whispering about his potential, saying they couldn't let it go to waste. I just sat there, invisible, while Alex got anything he needed, even when his interests led him to some obscure field that required him to travel across Europe. My parents signed the checks without a second thought. But when I asked to go on a school trip, they told me to get a part-time job if I was serious about it. It hurt. But over time, I got used to it. I was there, just not really there, if that makes any sense. My parents weren't cruel to me. I had food, clothes, a roof over my head. But love, real attention, that was scarce. I figured maybe I could earn my place if I just tried hard enough. So I threw myself into my studies, trying to outdo even Alex, though I knew it was a losing battle. He had the brains, Jessica had the charm, and I was just Tom. Ordinary, average Tom. High school became a brutal reminder of this imbalance. Every parent-teacher conference, my parents would show up for Alex and Jessica. But when it came to me, they'd sometimes forget the dates altogether. Once, I overheard my mom telling a friend that she just couldn't make it to everything with so many kids. Growing up, I felt like the extra child, the one they hadn't planned for and didn't quite know what to do with. By the time college rolled around, it became painfully clear just how far I was from the golden circle my siblings enjoyed. Jessica, the perfect daughter, had everything covered: tuition, books, rent, you name it. My parents made sure she didn't have to lift a finger for anything outside of school. She sailed through, landed a prime internship, and graduated with honors, debt-free. Then came Alex. They fully funded his international programs, private tutors, even a prestigious conference in Switzerland. By the time he graduated, he had everything he needed to succeed, all thanks to their bottomless support. But when it was my turn, I'll never forget how the story changed. I asked if they'd saved anything for my college expenses, and my dad looked me in the eye, completely unfazed, and said, "We've already spent so much on your siblings. You'll have to find another way." They chipped in a little, but it was nothing compared to what they'd done for Jessica and Alex. I ended up working 2 jobs just to cover tuition, pulling graveyard shifts at a 24-hour diner and barely making it to class, exhausted, the next morning. It stung, but after a while, I went numb. I had to. And then came Jessica's wedding. It was extravagant, a fairy tale come to life. They spent thousands to make her day perfect, covering the grand venue, a fancy catering service, and lavish decorations. I remember sitting in the back row, feeling like I was watching someone else's family celebration. My mom found me afterward, loitering by the dessert table, and told me to mingle more, as if I were some outsider making her look bad. Then came Alex's wedding. Another full display of support, this time for a destination wedding. They flew everyone out, covered all the hotel costs, and even arranged a sightseeing tour for the guests. When I told them I couldn't afford the plane ticket, my mom looked at me with this mix of irritation and pity, saying, "Tom, sometimes you need to sacrifice a little for family." So I swallowed the hurt, scraped together what I could, and went. They even had the nerve, after all that, to talk about how much they'd spent on Jessica and Alex's weddings, making it painfully clear that I was on my own if my day ever came. And they didn't disappoint. When I got engaged, not a word of support, not a single offer to help. When I finally brought it up, my mom just shrugged. "You're an adult now, Tom. We've done what we could." I remember sitting there, feeling a sick blend of anger and heartbreak, realizing that all these years, I had just been extra. To this day, if I bring up any of these memories, hoping to be heard, they wave it off. They tell me to let the past go, not dwell on things that don't matter anymore. They don't get it. They don't see that all I ever wanted was to feel like I was part of the family, not just a kid tagging along behind the ones they truly cared about. I remember my mom telling me once that I was overly sensitive and should be grateful for what I had. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was just a footnote in their grand story of raising Jessica and Alex. I hate to admit it out loud, but part of me wonders if I'll ever truly be part of this family, or if I'll always be the extra, the one they didn't plan for and didn't know what to do with. People say family is forever, but I'm not sure that's true for me. Family shouldn't make you feel invisible. For as long as I can remember, family dinners followed the same routine. My parents would gush about Jessica's and Alex's latest accomplishments, each story more extravagant than the last. Every Sunday, we'd gather around the table, and my role was to nod along, barely acknowledged, as if my job was simply to cheer them on and applaud at the right moments. One particular night stands out, a night where I felt especially invisible, simmering in quiet resentment. Jessica had just landed a massive promotion, practically a vice president now. My mom proudly detailed every aspect of her new position, describing Jessica's new office, her benefits package, and the company car option, as if we were listening to some magazine profile of a high-powered executive. Then came Alex's turn. He'd been invited to present at an exclusive conference on the West Coast, his third conference that year. My parents beamed as they shared every detail, looking at Jessica and Alex like they were the stars of a movie about their own dreams coming true. And me? I sat there, an afterthought, a spectator in my own life. They never asked about my work, my plans, or my dreams. Never. Something snapped in me that night. All those years of feeling overlooked, pushed aside, and ignored boiled over. I couldn't hold it back any longer. I took a deep breath, my voice trembling. "You know," I said, "it would be nice if you actually cared about what's going on in my life, too." The room went dead silent. My dad froze, his fork halfway to his mouth, and Jessica raised an eyebrow, looking at me as though I'd suddenly started speaking another language. My mom's proud smile faded, replaced by that exasperated look she always got when she thought I was being difficult. "Tom, don't start this," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "Tonight is about Jessica and Alex. They've worked hard, and we're proud of them." Her words stung, but I couldn't back down. "That's every night, though, isn't it? Every dinner, every conversation, it's always about them. Do you even know what's going on in my life?" I looked around the table, feeling the weight of years pressing down on me as I asked, "Do you even know what I do for work? Do you even care?" They exchanged uncomfortable glances, like they were deciphering a foreign language. Jessica shot me a look filled with pity and thinly veiled impatience, and Alex wouldn't even meet my eyes. It was like they'd already filed me away, already decided who I was, what I deserved. "Tom, that's not fair," my dad said finally, setting his fork down with a sigh. "We've always supported you." "Supported me?" I let out a hollow laugh. "You mean like when you told me to figure out college on my own? Or when you made me feel like it was my fault I couldn't afford to fly across the country for Alex's wedding? You've given them everything they could ever ask for. But for me, it's like I don't even exist." My mom's face hardened, her tone suddenly icy. "That's enough, Tom. We've done the best we could for all of you. Maybe if you stopped comparing yourself to others, you'd appreciate what you have." That was it. The moment I realized it didn't matter what I said, how I felt, or what I needed, they'd never get it. They'd already written their own version of the story, and in their eyes, I was just the ungrateful, difficult one. Jessica decided to chime in, her voice dripping with condescension. "Honestly, Tom," she scoffed, crossing her arms, "maybe you should try being a little grateful. Mom and Dad have done so much for us. Maybe you just don't realize how lucky you are." "Lucky?" I spat, feeling the heat rise in my face. "Lucky to feel invisible? Lucky to watch the two of you get everything handed to you while I fight for scraps? You both act like I'm not even part of this family, and they just go along with it." My dad's face flushed, his anger now mirroring mine. Enough, Tom. If you're so unhappy, maybe you should look at what you're contributing to this family. We're proud of Jessica and Alex because they're making something of themselves. They've earned it. Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. All I'd ever wanted was to be seen, to matter to them, just once. But in their eyes, I was an inconvenience, a failure, a shadow standing in the way of their golden children. They weren't listening, weren't even trying. All they could see was the threat to their picture-perfect world, the version of the family they'd built around Jessica and Alex. I couldn't take it anymore. I pushed my chair back, the harsh scrape against the floor like a crack through the tension. My voice trembled, but I held my ground. You know what? I'm done trying to be part of this family when it's clear I never will be. Go ahead. Keep worshipping your perfect children. I hope they give you everything you need. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out, my heart pounding, not knowing where I'd go, only that I couldn't stay there, couldn't bear to sit in that room one more second. I was done being a shadow in their golden spotlight. Done fighting to be part of a family that had already decided I was a stranger. After that night, things only got worse. My parents made it clear that my outburst had crossed an invisible line. Part of me thought they'd reach out, try to understand, maybe even attempt to see things from my perspective. But instead, they closed ranks. Jessica and Alex barely spoke to me, acting as if I'd committed some unforgivable crime by shattering their illusion of the perfect family. Now, it was like I was the problem that had to be swept under the rug to keep that illusion intact. For a while, I tried to let it go, to pretend things could be normal again. But the hurt just kept building, festering beneath the surface. Family gatherings became unbearable, each one a reminder of how little I meant to them. They'd chat endlessly about Jessica's wedding plans or Alex's new job, and I'd sit there in silence, feeling like a stranger at my own family's table. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I thought if I could just get them to meet me somewhere neutral, away from the house and all its unspoken rules, maybe they'd be able to see reason. I asked them to meet at a coffee shop, hoping we could talk like adults without all the family dynamics clouding everything. But when they arrived, I saw that same look of disappointment on their faces, like my very presence was a burden. Taking a deep breath, I tried explaining how I'd felt for years, how much it hurt to be ignored, to be treated as an afterthought. But they didn't want to hear it. My mom cut me off almost immediately, saying I was dragging the family down with my selfish complaints. My dad just sat there, arms crossed, staring at his coffee, refusing to engage. Jessica hadn't even bothered to come, and I found out later that Alex had decided not to show because he didn't want to deal with the drama. That was the moment I realized just how deep the rift really was. They weren't just ignoring my pain, they were denying it altogether, refusing to acknowledge that they had ever done anything wrong. To them, I was the problem, the ungrateful son who couldn't appreciate what he'd been given. I walked out of that coffee shop feeling more alone than ever, knowing they saw me as nothing more than a shadow, a ghost, someone they could dismiss without a second thought. After that disastrous meeting, something shifted inside me. It was like a heavy curtain had lifted, and for the first time, I stopped hoping things would get better with my family. They weren't going to wake up one day and suddenly see me. They had their version of the story, and in it, I was nothing more than a supporting character, if that. So I did the only thing that made sense. I walked away. It wasn't an easy decision. Walking away from your family isn't something you do on a whim, no matter how much they've hurt you. If they'd made me feel invisible my entire life, I had to create something of my own, something they couldn't ignore, something that stood on its own, whether they acknowledged it or not. I started small, taking on freelance projects in web design. It wasn't glamorous, but I had a knack for it, and I liked the creative control. Working out of my cramped apartment, I'd pull all-nighters, teaching myself everything I could about the business. There was no fallback plan, no safety net, and no one to bail me out if things went wrong. This had to work, or I'd be right back at square one. The early days were brutal. I'd reach out to potential clients, send proposal after proposal, only to hear nothing but silence. Weeks went by without a single response, and I started to wonder if I was fooling myself. To keep the lights on, I scraped by doing odd jobs, anything to make rent while waiting for a real opportunity to come my way. Then I met Sam, a startup founder looking for a web redesign on a shoestring budget. He wasn't exactly my dream client, demanding, condescending, nitpicking every detail, calling me at all hours with impossible demands. But I needed the work, so I took the job. Working with Sam was a nightmare, and more than once, after another brutal round of revisions, I found myself ready to quit. But as I sat there, staring at the code on my screen late one night, something clicked. I realized that this project, as grueling as it was the test I needed. If I could push through, if I could complete this job exactly as he wanted, I'd prove to myself that I could handle anything. So I dug in and finished the project, every last detail done to perfection. When I finally delivered it, Sam was thrilled. To my surprise, he introduced me to a few of his contacts who were also looking for web developers. Suddenly, I had a steady stream of clients. I wasn't scraping by anymore. For the first time, I felt like I was getting somewhere. Building my business wasn't just about making money. It was about proving to myself that I didn't need anyone's help, least of all my family's. With each job, I felt that growing sense of pride, the satisfaction that comes from earning every bit of success on your own. I started seeing myself differently, not as the overlooked middle child, but as someone capable, independent, and strong. A few months later, I crossed paths with Megan, an old college friend who'd gone into marketing. She'd heard about my work and was interested in teaming up on a project. For a moment, I couldn't even respond. I just sat there, stunned, as her words sank in. After all those years of feeling like the outsider, of being the forgotten child, they were finally reaching out, not to congratulate me on my success, not to apologize, not to connect. They were here because they needed something from me. My mom wanted me to help Jessica, the golden child who'd always had everything handed to her, who never had to worry about scraping by. Now that her marriage was crumbling and she was struggling financially, they thought I'd swoop in and bail her out because I was doing well. I felt anger boiling up, decades worth of hurt and resentment bubbling to the surface. For years, I had been the afterthought, the one who had to fend for himself while Jessica and Alex got everything they needed and more. Now, when they were finally noticing me, it was because I had something they wanted. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "So, let me get this straight," I said, my voice calm but laced with bitterness. "After all this time, you finally want to know about my life because you need something from me?" My mom shifted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable, but she tried to keep her tone gentle. "Tom, it's not like that. Family helps family. Jessica's going through a rough time, and you're in a position to lend a hand." "Family helps family," I repeated, incredulous. "Like the way you helped me through college? Or how you supported me when I was barely scraping by? Or is family only about Jessica and Alex?" She pursed her lips, clearly caught off guard by my response. "That was different," she muttered, her voice defensive. "We did our best for all of you." I let out a harsh laugh. "Your best? Mom, you never even tried with me. And now, when you need something, you suddenly remember I exist." Her face softened, like she was about to say something sentimental to smooth things over. But I wasn't going to let her off the hook. "I'm sorry Jessica's going through a hard time," I continued, my voice steady, "but I worked too hard to get where I am to just throw it away. You and Dad made it clear I wasn't a priority back then, and I don't see why that should change now just because it's convenient." My mom's expression shifted, a flash of irritation crossing her face. "So that's it? You're just going to abandon your sister when she needs you?" I shook my head, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and relief. "No, Mom. I'm not abandoning anyone. But for once, I'm putting myself first. I built this life without your help. And I'm not going to let you guilt me into giving it away just because now it suits you." She looked down, clearly not expecting the firm answer I'd given. For the first time, I felt free, like I'd finally stepped out of the shadow of their expectations. This was my life, built with my own hands, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me, not even family. After a long silence, I stood up, tossing a few bills on the table. "Take care, Mom," I said, my voice soft but resolute. "I hope Jessica finds the help she needs." And with that, I walked out, feeling stronger than I ever had before. I froze, the familiar voice on the other end of the line stirring up a flood of emotions I'd tried to bury long ago. It was my dad, his tone hesitant and uncertain, like he wasn't even sure I'd remember him. "Tom," he said slowly, almost like he was testing the waters. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time." It was surreal, hearing his voice again after years of silence. Memories surged up, unbidden, The family gatherings where I was invisible, the times I'd practically begged for recognition, the day they'd asked me to bail Jessica out as if my life's only purpose was to support their favorites. I'd worked so hard to build a new life, one that didn't involve them. And now, here he was, dredging it all back up. "What is it?" I asked, keeping my tone as even as I could, though my chest tightened with every word. He paused, his uncertainty palpable. I wanted to talk. It's been a while, and, well, things haven't been easy here." "Things haven't been easy," I repeated, the bitterness I'd tried to forget creeping into my voice. "Is this another favor call, Dad? Because I've heard this one before." There was silence on the other end. For a moment, I thought he might actually hang up. But he sighed, the sound heavy and resigned. "Tom, listen. Your mom's not doing well. Jessica's going through a hard time, and Alex isn't around much. I just thought, maybe we could talk." I couldn't help it. A bitter laugh escaped me. "So, now that everyone else is busy, now that things are falling apart, you finally remember I exist? You don't think it's a little late for that?" "Tom," he said, his voice breaking a little, a tone I wasn't used to hearing from him. "I know we haven't always. I know things weren't fair. But you're still our son. I thought maybe we could try again, as a family." A cold anger settled over me, one that had been years in the making. "Family," I said, my voice hardening. "I spent my whole life as an outsider in my own family, Dad. I begged for a fraction of the attention you gave Jessica and Alex. And when I finally built something of my own, the only time you noticed was when you wanted a favor." "Tom, please," he started, but I cut him off. "No," I said firmly. "You don't get to rewrite history. You don't get to pretend it was some small oversight. You ignored me my whole life. I needed you back then. No, I don't need you. Not anymore." The silence on the other end was almost deafening. For the first time, I heard the weight of his regret, the years of choices that had led us to this moment. But I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel anything, really, except a strange, hollow relief. "Goodbye, Dad," I said, my voice steady. "Take care of Mom. Take care of Jessica and Alex. But don't call me again." And with that, I hung up, feeling lighter, as if I'd finally closed a door I'd been waiting to shut my entire life. I spent so long feeling like I didn't matter to them, just the fallback option they'd call when things got rough. Yet even as I thought that, a small voice inside kept reminding me that they were still my parents. They were flawed, sure, but they had raised me, even if they hadn't done it all that well. "All right, I'll think about it," I finally said, keeping my tone as even as possible. When I hung up, it felt like the ground had shifted beneath me, and the days that followed were thick with tension. Part of me wanted to cut them off, to let them deal with the consequences of their own choices. But another part, one I didn't even realize was still there, felt the pull of family, the deep-rooted sense that, despite everything, they were still my blood. Eventually, I reached out, but this time it would be on my terms. I arranged to meet them at my office, a neutral place that wouldn't bring up old patterns. When they arrived, I noticed they looked different from what I remembered. My dad seemed smaller somehow, his shoulders slumped, and my mom's face was etched with worry, her eyes weary and dimmed. We sat down, and I got straight to the point. "I'll help you," I said, watching their faces closely. Relief washed over my mom's face, and my dad's shoulders seemed to drop as the tension drained out. But I held up my hand to stop them. "There are conditions." My dad's face tensed a little, but he nodded. "Whatever you say, Tom." "First," I said firmly, "this isn't a handout. It's a loan, just like you asked. I'll help you with the immediate stuff, but I want it in writing that you'll pay it back when you're able." They exchanged uneasy glances before nodding, clearly uncomfortable with the whole arrangement. I knew it was humiliating for them, but I didn't care. They needed to understand that things had changed. I wasn't the ignored kid anymore. I was someone they needed to take seriously. "Second," I went on, "I want complete transparency about your finances. I'm not just throwing money at this. If I'm helping, I need to know exactly where it's going." They hesitated, but eventually they agreed. It was clear they weren't thrilled with my terms, but they didn't have other options. They needed me, and for once, the power was in my hands. After finalizing everything, I wrote them a check to cover the most urgent bills. As they left my office, I felt an odd blend of relief, sadness, and, surprisingly, a sense of closure. I'd done what I felt I needed to do, and I didn't owe them anything more. The weeks that followed were tense but manageable. They sent me regular updates on their finances, and, bit by bit, I saw them start to stabilize. I even visited them a few times, each visit a little easier than the last. It was clear they'd finally come to terms with the new dynamics, and so had I. They'd finally started to see me differently, not as the forgotten son, but as someone who'd built a life on his own terms. One night after dinner, my mom pulled me aside. "Tom," she said softly, her voice almost hesitant, "I know we weren't the parents you deserved. We put you through so much, and I'm sorry." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks, and for a second, I just stood there, not sure what to say. Then, as I looked at her, I felt something shift, like a weight was lifting off my shoulders. "It's okay, Mom," I replied, and for the first time, I actually meant it. Life had certainly turned out in ways I never expected. A few days later, I was sitting in my office, staring at the latest financial update from my parents. Strangely, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, not even satisfaction. Just a kind of numbness that surprised me. It was as if my heart had finally grown tired of the constant cycle of family tension and resentment. And in that quiet, a new truth settled over me. I didn't owe them anything. I leaned back, rubbing my temples, feeling the weight of the last few weeks pressing down on me. I'd done more than enough for them, given them money, time, and, most importantly, a second chance. But it seemed like no matter how much I offered, they always wanted more. More understanding, more patience, more of me. And frankly, I was exhausted. For the first time, I didn't feel that pull to step in, to make everything right, to be the fixer they turned to when things went sideways. As that realization sank in, I felt a strange sense of relief. I didn't have to keep doing this. I could walk away if I wanted, and they would have to figure things out on their own. After all these years of feeling overlooked and taken for granted, I finally had the power to say no. I sat there for a long while, letting that thought sink in. It was liberating, but it also scared me. I wasn't used to putting myself first. For so long, I'd been chasing their approval, desperate to prove I was worth something. And now, with the chance to break free from that need, I honestly didn't know what to do with it. Just then, Megan walked into my office, snapping me out of my thoughts. She took one look at me and raised an eyebrow, her usual blend of sarcasm and understanding written all over her face. Megan had been my rock through all of this, the one who stayed up with me during late-night rants, who reminded me of my worth when my parents' indifference started eating at me. In that moment, I felt a rush of gratitude for her, for the way she'd kept me grounded through it all. "You look like you've been hit by a truck," she said, dropping into the chair across from me, her eyes full of concern and a hint of teasing. "Feels that way," I muttered, pushing the latest update from my parents across the desk to Megan. She skimmed it quickly, her expression hard to read. "So," she said after a moment, "what's the plan? You going to bail them out again?" I shrugged, not quite able to meet her eyes. "I don't know. Part of me feels like I should, like I owe it to them. But another part, I just don't know if I have it in me anymore, Meg." She nodded thoughtfully, leaning back in her chair. "Tom, you've done more than enough. Way more than anyone could expect. They weren't there for you when you needed them, so why should you feel like you have to be there for them now?" Her words hit me right in the gut, stirring up a complicated mix of guilt and, strangely, a flicker of satisfaction. She was right. I'd spent so much of my life trying to prove myself to people who barely seemed to care. And now, when I finally had the chance to just walk away, it felt like I'd be breaking some invisible rule of family loyalty. "I guess I don't know," I said, struggling to find the right words. Part of me wants them to understand that I don't need them, that I've built a life just fine without their approval. But another part of me, I trailed off, not sure how to put the rest into words. Megan reached across the desk and gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. "Tom, listen to me, you don't owe them a thing. You've built something incredible on your own, something they had no part in. You've already given them chances to make things right. But if they don't want to change, that's not on you." Her words settled into the empty spaces inside me, the ones shaped by years of resentment and guilt. And as much as I wanted to believe her, a small part of me still clung to this hope that maybe, just maybe, my parents would finally see me for who I was. Deep down, though, I knew that wasn't realistic. People didn't change overnight, and my parents, well, they were pretty set in their ways. So I decided not to answer them right away. I needed time to figure out what I really wanted, not what they expected, not what would make them happy, but what would bring me peace. I sent them a short message saying I needed some space to process everything. It wasn't a lie. I truly did need the time. But more than that, I wanted to see if they'd respect my boundaries for once. Days turned into weeks, and for the first time in years, my phone was blissfully silent. No frantic calls, no guilt-ridden messages, just quiet. And in that quiet, I found something I hadn't felt in a very long time: peace. Meanwhile, I threw myself into work, pouring my energy into the projects and clients that had become my sanctuary. Megan and I tackled new challenges, pushing the business to new heights. We even landed a major contract with a big client, the kind that could set us up for years. Securing that national brand had felt like a victory I'd been chasing my entire life. Finally, I was living on my own terms, free from the crushing weight of my family's expectations. But just when I thought I'd escaped, my phone rang. It was my mom. Her voice, softer and strangely hesitant, stirred a pang of dread deep in my chest. "Tom," she started, her voice trembling slightly. I know I haven't been the mother you deserved. We've hurt you, in ways we can never undo. But I want you to know we're proud of you. We really are." I sat there, stunned. For so many years, I'd longed for that. Just a scrap of validation, a hint that I was worth something in their eyes. But hearing it now, out of the blue, the words felt brittle, like they'd break if I looked at them too closely. "Thanks, Mom," I said flatly, keeping my voice guarded. "I appreciate it." Silence. Then her tone shifted, her voice carrying a desperate edge. "Tom, we really do need your help. I know we haven't been there for you, but please don't turn your back on us now." I closed my eyes, feeling her words slam into me. A part of me wanted to cave, to give them whatever they needed so the weight of the tension would finally lift. But a stronger part, the part that had fought tooth and nail to build a life they'd had no hand in, resisted. "I'll think about it," I said, my voice steady and unyielding. Then I ended the call, feeling the strange sensation of relief mingled with an exhaustion that went bone deep. For once, I didn't feel the need to rush, to immediately decide. I could take my time and do what was best for me. In the days that followed, I found myself replaying the years of hurt, the endless cycle of resentment and guilt that had twisted around me like a vice. I'd spent so long feeling like I wasn't enough, like I'd been running on a treadmill just to prove myself worthy of their love. But now, I finally had a choice. I could either let those feelings keep gnawing at me, or I could let them go. In the end, I chose to wait. I held off on giving them an answer, letting the silence stretch between us. For the first time, I felt a powerful sense of peace in that quiet. I didn't owe them a single thing, not my approval, not my time, not my loyalty. I was finally free of the need to prove myself, free from the shadow of expectations I'd been living under for so long. And in that freedom, I found a calm that felt as fierce as anything I'd ever known.